Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at one of my games from a recent tournament in Chicago. It was a tough event for me. Didn't really do so well, lost 2 games and won 1, and the rest were drawn, and not the most inspiring draws either. But still some interesting moments, even in some of the draws, and one of the losses wasn't really very interesting. It could have been a very good game, but I simply blundered. The other game had its interesting moments, and maybe we'll cover that at some point. Here's a fragment from the game that I won. It was against Christoph Flega, and at this point I'm in good shape. So I had black. This was not from a Benoni, but from a Trompowsky, and despite that, it certainly turned into a Benoni kind of position. Now, at this point, I'm doing very well, and by and large, I played this game pretty cleanly. I was late in the event, I warmed up a little bit, and it didn't hurt that I was playing one of the lower-rated players in the tournament, too. But still, I think I played reasonably well, except at one key moment, as we'll see in this video. So, position is, at this moment, reasonably solid for black and healthy. So I just played e6 with a couple of ideas. So one is that I want to keep his knight off of f5, so I'm prepared for that. I'm also trying to break the center open. Since I have the bishop pair, that's a good idea. Also because white is really kind of loading up on the wing over there, on the king side. It makes sense for me to try to open the center for counterattacking purposes. So at this point, I felt pretty confident. But what should white do? So white has some problems here. I mean, black is starting to play maybe e takes d5 followed by bishop to b7, or maybe e takes and then queen to b7. Another idea is to play c4 and knight to d3. So there are quite a few things that black has going for him, but white's move, what should he do? He could always take on e6, but if he does that, then either recapture, probably with the f-pawn, I mean that would at least be my first inclination, is going to give me very nice pressure along the f-file. Actually, both recaptures are pretty good. I'd have to think about it. Okay, well anyway, figure out what you want to do with white and try to analyze it as best as you can, and then we'll discuss the position. Okay, well white could play a number of things, but really the only move that I think is going to cause black even the slightest amount of concern is the move my opponent played, which is knight to h5. And I expected this, but doesn't make it any less of a good move. Okay, well I don't want to let this knight live. I certainly want to play bishop to h8, and I don't want to allow him to swap off my dark square bishop either. So the only thing that's left is g takes h5, which is fine. G takes h5, and once again we have a position that merits analysis. So I had worked this out to some extent beforehand, but I still spent some time considering what I think are the two really main or maybe even only moves in the position. So think about this position for a while, see what you can come up with for black. Okay, well I hope you've spent some time on this because it is a very interesting and complicated position. Now black has really 2 approaches here. One is to try to keep the loot and run with it, and that would be the approach represented by the move king to h8, getting out of the pin so that h6 can be met by bishop to f6. Alright, so that's one approach. The second way to go is simply to return the piece, but to plug up the file here with knight to g6. And if white takes on g6, then I can take either way. I probably would have captured with the f-pawn, opening up the f-file for the nefarious purposes that I might just devise with my rook. So, what to do? Well, let's look at king to h8. Let's start with the greedy approach. Okay, now here, the only move that really seems to make any sense is rook takes g7, king takes g7, queen to g2 check. And again, we've got a choice here. So do I retreat the king, or do I play knight to g6? So knight to g6 is returning some material, but hey, I'm up a rook for a pawn, so I'm perfectly happy to give back a piece for pawn, which will leave me the full exchange ahead with some attack. So that looks pretty plausible. Okay, But we can at least consider king to h8 for a moment. And only after rook to g1. Okay, now what do I do? Well, f6 is no good because bishop to h6. And white is clearly better here. I've got some serious problems. The only move, I think, is queen to f7, but then probably bishop to g7 check, and maybe bishop takes f6. Okay, this is kind of iffy. Also, well, no, okay, that looks like the soundest. Maybe f4 can be played as well after queen to f7. So there are quite a few things that white can play, and all the options are good for white. I mean, at some point I'm going to have to play knight to g6 anyway, so delaying it is only giving white more options. So here I can maybe play knight to g6. This might not be that bad, but if I'm going to go this way, it doesn't really seem to make much sense for me to wait for his rook to get onto the g file as well. So let's look at the immediate knight to g6. Okay, rook to g1 makes sense. There's no rush to take the knight on g6. And now we have a very interesting position. So first of all, if it's white to move here, he has an interesting way of proceeding, namely bishop to h6 check. Hope you saw this idea. Now, king f6, queen g5 is mate. Not that king f6 is something that you would seriously consider. And if king takes h6, white forces mate like this. So check, check, and then queen f6. Okay, so this is fairly easy to find. But you should notice that black can disregard all of these gifts and play king to g8. And now, okay, white gets all of his stuff back, but the resulting position is about equal. I mean, white's position is certainly more active looking, but we shouldn't underestimate the power of the bishop. And especially when this bishop comes to b7, there could be some real angst for white having to do with this a8 to h1 diagonal. So the chances seem to me about equal in this position. Okay, at any rate, after rook to g1, it's black to move, and an obvious looking move is queen to e7, trying to take over the f6 square, so we're preventing that variation. Bishop to h6 check, can just rip it off. Okay, well, what should white do here? White to move, what to do? A queen to g3 is possible, but there's a very interesting move here for white, and this leads to remarkable complications. It's bishop to g5. So this was suggested by Morales in the postmortem. So he was watching our game, and after I had the bishop to h6 line that I showed a moment ago, he found this idea, which is pretty nice. So of course, if the queen moves, well, bishop to h6 check yet again. And if f6, well, even here, bishop to h6 check we quickly found. Takes, h takes g6, and now it looks as if black is in big trouble. But see if you can find a defense for him, for me, if we went this route. How can black keep the wolf from the door and keep body and soul together? Well, it's pretty incredible, but it seems that e takes d5 can be played. Very, very hard to believe. The whole point, of course, is that the bishop on c8 is covering the h3 square, and it's really remarkable, but it seems to survive. Alright, so here white has at least two ways to proceed. The computer likes the safe move knight to f1, and indeed, this is pretty good. White is going to regain most of the material, so king to g7 is pretty well forced, g takes h7, and now the only move is bishop to g4. So the point is, if king to h8, which is just a blunder, white plays queen to g8 check, rook takes, and then hg8 makes a no queen and ends the game. So we have to play bishop to g4 so that the back rank is adequately covered. But of course we're returning a big chunk of material. And okay, here after f5, the material is approximately equal, but really white is starting to, well, he's kind of run out of gas here. Black is pretty well consolidated and maybe even is a touch better. Okay, so the really fun move, and the move that looks like it should just be crushing, is g takes h7. And how in the world is black supposed to survive this? Queen to g8 is threatened, queen to g6 mate is of course threatened. what do? I can't play king takes h7 because queen to g6 check, queen to h6 check, and queen takes f8, mate next move. So that's obviously not any good. So I have to play queen takes h7, and it's incredible. My king is just wide open. You know, I'm kind of leading with my chin here, but there doesn't seem to be any knockout blow. But it's very, very unclear. So, for instance, queen to g3, threatening queen h4 mate. Only move is king to h5, and now queen takes d6. So white can just kind of take his time too. So the funny thing is, although there is no knockout blow, maybe white doesn't really need one. Okay, the threat is not only queen takes f8, but also queen takes d5 check, and then queen takes a8. So bishop to d7, queen d5, king h6, queen d6, rook a to e8, queen f4, king h5, knight f1, maybe rook e5, h4, bishop to e6, and I don't know how to assess this. I mean, black is just stuck. His king is not getting out of here. Okay, I'm a rook up for 2 pawns, but how do I make progress? You know, knight to g3 is always sort of looming over my head. It doesn't really doesn't knock me out yet, because knight g3, king g6, knight f5, king f7, rook g7, queen takes, knight takes, king takes, and I've got 2 rooks and a bishop for a queen and a couple of pawns. So materially, I'm doing all right there. So you know, it's a very dangerous position, but and maybe you can find a forced win if you work at it. But at least for the moment, I think I'm okay. Anyway, very, very complicated variation. So, going all the way back here to g takes h5. Of course, I didn't see all of this. I saw some things, but it looked very risky. And since I had to play knight to g6 in any case in those variations, I thought, well, you know, why go through these all this drama and give up my dark squared bishop? So just play knight to g6 straight away. And I think this is the right decision. Okay, white played queen to g2. No reason to take straight away. And now I made a very risky but correct decision. But there's danger in doing what I did. So here I wanted to get my bishop into play. In fact, get a bunch of my pieces into play. So I played this. E takes d5, e takes d5, and then bishop to b7. Now, this is very good for my bishop. It approves wholeheartedly of this decision. My bishop on b7, that is. And my rooks are both ready to use the e-file. However, I'm letting his knight get into a very good square. So now I throw out this knight going into g5. Of course, he's threatening to take on d6 as well. And you know, it's definitely a double-edged decision. But I had seen this, and I prepared something which is in fact a very good idea. But it has to be done the right way. So again, this is a very good place to stop the recording, see what you can find. What should I do? Okay, well, I'm up a piece for a pawn, but white has lots of threats, threatening to recapture my knight at any point, threatening to take on d6 with the bishop, and I have to be careful. So, I want to protect the pawn on d6. The question is, which way should I do it? Do I play rook a to d8 or rook f to d8? Well, at one level, the most natural move you might say is, well, play rook a to d8. But, okay, there are some lines here. Well, okay, here's the line that I have in mind. So let's say rook a to d8. White takes time out and protects his pawn. And now, here's the key idea. f5. So I'm counterattacking the knight, and I'm going to attack the bishop on f4 as well. In some line, for instance, if he plays hg6, I play f takes e4. Okay, actually, we'll skip over that variation. Come back to it later on. So bishop takes d6, rook takes d6, knight takes d6, queen d6, hg, queen g6, takes, and then here rook to d8. And this was basically my idea. So I saw all of this. I don't remember where I saw it. I think I saw it before I played e takes d5. but certainly was considering it deeply after my opponent played knight to e4, but I think before that. And I felt that although white is doing well on material at the moment, has a rook and 2 pawns for my bishop here, still, positions like this, the bishops are going to rule the roost. All I have to do is make sure that no immediate threats come and kill me, and after that, the opponent is going to be in serious trouble. So I think black is clearly better here. Maybe it's not enough to win. Maybe it is. We'll have to wait and see, but certainly I'm happy in this position. So this was the idea. And the question is, well, which rook should I use on d8? So I had thought I should play rook f to d8, so that way in some variations there won't be a rook hanging on f8. So rook c to d1, f5, and then on bishop takes d6 we have the same thing. Rook d6, knight d6, here, takes, and rook to d8. And I should be, I don't know if I'm winning, but I'm much better. However, this was in fact wrong. Rook f to d8 was a blunder, or at least a serious mistake, because after rook c to d1, f5, white should not take on d6 with either piece. So in the game he played knight takes d6, which is just a big blunder, and after this everything was easy. So I'll show you the game quickly here. I just played knight takes f4, and white's just dead lost. I'm up 2 pieces now for 2 pawns, and I'm threatening the queen, and I'm threatening the knight. And okay, so if he plays queen g7, just take everything. He gets the bishop, but after rook takes d5, I'm up a rook. Simple as that. So after knight takes f4, he played queen g5, and here, okay, I mean, I didn't try to maximize what I had. I just made sure that everything was safe. I had enough material to win the game. So rook takes d6, queen f4, rook d7, queen f5. So I was happy to let him play queen takes, and then h6, because then I'm just trading everything off. I'm going to be up a full piece. I'll get the d-pawn, trivial win. So he plays queen f5, rook f7, queen e6, queen f4, threatening to devastate with queen takes f3 check. So he plays rook g3. Now I just get out of both pins with king to h8, rook e1. There's no mate threat, so of course I calculated it many times just to make super sure. So I just played rook to d8, threatening bishop takes d5, rook e4. And now here I could play bishop takes d5, but again, just safety first. Don't want any tricks, so queen f6, h6, I take, rook h3, okay, and now bishop takes d5. Last move of the game, rook takes h6, queen f3, mate next move, he resigned. Okay, so a happy ending to a mostly very well played game by me, but rook f to d8 was bad, because after rook c to d1, f5, h takes g6 would ruin my day. So f takes e4, and g takes h7, king h8, and here he can take time out for f takes e4. And if my rook was on f8, he couldn't have done that. So believe it or not, that makes all the difference in the world. So if I've got a rook on f8 here, so if we hop this rook from a8 over to f8, I'm just winning. He's got to take time out to protect the bishop, and then I just play e takes f3, and I've got everything covered, and I'm in great shape. So I'll have an extra piece for a couple of pawns at least, plus a very strong counterattack. So queen f7 would come next. Let's say he played queen g3, he could play queen f7, or just e takes f3, queen f3, and then queen f7. White's in big trouble. So what happens as the game actually stands? Well, f takes e4, and okay, what do? Position is very tough. And here's just a sample line. I'm sure I could try other things, but really, it's just horrible. So let's say rook to d7, queen g6, rook f8, bishop h6, rook e7, rook g5, and he just piles up. And okay, now the only question is, can white force a win here? And this isn't a bad exercise for you to see if you can figure out how white's move should break through. It's not a one mover, it's just finding the right plan. How does white do it? Well, the answer is this. He wants to play rook f5, But it doesn't work just yet because rook f5 and bishop takes d5. So we just support, we prepare it. So rook 1 to g3. And, okay, let's say black plays bishop to a8, king g1, c4, rook f5. And there it is. And white just wins. So the threat is to play bishop takes g7, rook g7, and then rook to f8. And what do? I need to keep all of my guys here, all of my heavy pieces protecting on g7. And, I have to cover f8 as well, and it's just too much. So, for instance, queen a7, rook f5, and now bishop g7, queen e8, rook h3, mating. The end. All right, so there are other variations, but essentially this plan for white is decisive. Okay, another variation. Instead of bishop to a8, I could try, okay, let's see what happens if I just do nothing. Okay, so again, king g1, getting out of the way of the check. Okay, and now, all right, again, if waiting, bishop c8, rook f5. Okay, if black waits, just takes, rook f8 is the end. And if rook f5, ef, and there's no good answer to the threatened f6. I've got nothing that I can do against this that gives me even a scrap of hope. Okay, another try. Let's say bishop takes d5. This is actually almost interesting. All right, so he takes d5, rook e1, rook e2, and so white has this, gets out of the checks. And the problem now is, okay, takes, and what do? I'm just stuck here, and then white just liquidates everything. And the king comes up. You just leave the h-pawn here, you bring the king up as far as you can. Let's say I'm waiting here on f5, and the pawn starts moving up until I give ground, and then I lose everything. So I'm just dead lost here. Again, maybe there's something I can do a little bit earlier, but there's not really too many moves before I get into this big bind here. So I think ultimately after h takes g6, I'm probably in very bad shape. So it's amazing, just that one, the old aphorism about the wrong rook, it held true again. So after rook a to d1, there's no problem. Rook c to d1, f5, and now if h takes g6, f e4, no problems. But, well, that's how the game goes. Sometimes you need a little bit of luck, and I think I made enough good moves that it wasn't wholly unmerited, but still, at the end of the day, I had a little bit of good fortune. Very complicated position, and made a mistake. So I hope you enjoyed this. I think it was certainly a very interesting game. A lot of fascinating lines here, and again, it just shows sometimes what a cruel and painful game chess can be. That this little inaccuracy by me could have cost me the game, and he missed a chance. He certainly saw h takes g6, but just hallucinated. At any rate, fascinating little contest here. I'm fortunate to have escaped it, as I said, and probably the most interesting fragment I had. So there might be one or two more at some point, but this was probably the richest game as far as content goes from the tournament. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week with something new. Until then, take a look at my blog, please, chessmind.powerblogs.com, chessmind.powerblogs.com. Thanks again. Good night. See you next week. Bye-bye.